The Agora was the civic center of Athens, but it wasn't only frequented by politicians and city officials. The area housed a market where people could purchase food and other goods from merchants. It was also frequented by philosophers, who used the public space to establish schools and pass on their teachings to students. Religion had its place as well. Temples dedicated to Hephaestus and Apollo were located in the Agora, along with the altar of the 12 gods and the monument of the eponymous heroes.
Ήκουσα την ευθεία ταύτην και το πρώτερο. Μέληση υπήρχε. Η ακριβής τελείως. Ουκ έστειλη σπουδαίων. Ο εμός πατήρ δε μία συναλλαγή είχε με τα δικά του.
Ο σωστατήτης θα ανέστηλες βλέπεις ύπος. Κάποτε απεπειράθη πολίσον μια κάμιλον, λέγον είναι περσικών υπάριον. Ιούσι διαφόρος εκεί. Επίουν και σε αλόκοτον. Δεν περότετα. Φύγε πόνο. Προείδηκα του πατρί σου ότι έδει πάπλα.
Οι οφθαλμοί μου πεσεύουσι. Βρώμεθα το παραδείγμα των έργων αυτού ή να αντιβάλλουμε το παραδείγμα στην ανσυλλογισμό. Αντιβάλλουμε το Θεό και ναός ούτε στη πανήγυρη. Η όρηση, η όρηση και το επίσταστε. Σύμφωνηση, αλλά στα στραγωδί.
The painted stoa, or stoa poikile, derived its name from the panel paintings on its wall. The paintings were created in the 5th century BCE by famous artists like Polygnotus and depicted Greek military victories like the Battle of Marathon. The stoa served as a public meeting place for citizens, but it was especially popular with philosophers who used the space to pass on their teachings. In 301 BCE, the philosopher Zeno of Kition chose the Stoa Poikile as the location for his school of philosophy, the appropriately dubbed Stoicism. Trade in the agora was supervised by magistrates. There were 5 agoranomoi, who kept order in the market, controlled the quality of goods, and collected market dues. This provided revenue to the city and helped pay the magistrates and those in charge of maintaining order. The market benefited everyone. Customers bought what they needed, merchants made their living, and city officials received the money they needed to keep the wheels of democracy turning. The original Temple of Apollo Patrous was built around 535 BCE by Pisistratos, but was destroyed by the Persians during their invasion a few decades later. It long remained in ruins, except for the altar, which was left standing as a reminder of the Persian sacrilege. Eventually, a new temple was built in the 4th century BCE. Inside was a statue made by Euphranor, the same artist who painted in the Stoa of Zeus. The temple held special significance in Athens, as it was connected to the origin of the city's people. The name Patrous, meaning fatherly, referenced the belief that Apollo was the father of Aeon, founder of the Aeonian Greeks, from whom all Athenians are descended.
Μεγαλώνυμε και πολιώνυμε.
Επικαλούμε σε, Μάχαρ, πολιώνυμε, πυρήπολε και τελετάρχα. μεγαλώνει και πολιώνει φωνία και θηροκτώνε, φιλαβρώτη και λυπηρία, δρυμονίτης και βροτώνελ.
Τι συνέβη μόλις?
Μόνον όταν το επιχείρημα δομή και πιστικών, τότε δυνατόν κερδάνε εν ζήτημα. Ζητήματα θα ανατρέψουν.
όμως ετεροδίο, αγαπά τον Ελβίο.
Γιατί όχι.
Πού καλυθεύει εδώ εσύ?
Η αφήθνουσα αναμένει σε αυτό.
Πέφτει και άπαντα Αθήνη μου. Τελείωσε.
Τι σκρεοδοτεί εγώ.
The Temple of Hephaestus overlooks the Agora from the Colonus Agoraeus Hill. Today, it is one of the best preserved temples in Greece, owing to its conversion to a church in the Middle Ages. But while this transformation preserved the structure, it also damaged the surrounding sculptures. The temple was dedicated not only to Hephaestus, the god of metallurgy, but also to Athena Ergane, goddess of arts and crafts. Nearly every part of the Hephaestion was lavishly decorated with depictions of famous mythological events, like the labors of Theseus. The Theseus scenes gave the temple the nickname Thesion, a name that lives on today as a city district in Athens. The Bouleuterion was another building in the Agora that contributed to the democratic process. It housed the Athenian Council of Citizens, the Boulei. This Council of 500 was composed of 50 members from each Greek tribe, all of whom served a one-year term. They were chosen by lot from among citizens over 30. Every month, one group of 50 was chosen to lead the Boulei's executive committee, the Prytaneis. The Prytaneis met every day of the month and called meetings of the full council in the Bouleuterion, where they spent their time discussing bills. The Prytaneon was one of the most important buildings in the Agora, as it was the headquarters of the Prytaneis. The Prytaneis was the executive committee of the Boulei, who ran the city's daily operations. The Prytaneis dined in the Prytaneon, and 17 of them slept on site to ensure there were always officials available to deal with emergencies. The Prytaneon also housed the official weights and measures of the city. The Fire of Hestia, which provided sacred fire for all public sacrifices, was also located there. The Bouleuterion, it housed the Athenian. This Council of 500 was composed of 50 members from each Greek. Every month, the Prytaneis met. The Prytaneon was one of the most important buildings in the Agora, as it was the headquarters of the Prytaneis. The Prytaneis was the executive committee of the Boulei, who ran the city's daily operations. The Prytaneis dined in the Prytaneon, and 17 of them slept on site to ensure there were always officials available to deal with emergencies. The Prytaneon also housed the official weights and measures of the city. The Fire of Hestia, which provided sacred fire for all public sacrifices, was also located there. The Heliaia was the most important court in Athens and was presided over by a group of judges called Heliasts. Judging was a regular part of an Athenian citizen's life, with trials happening almost every day. Heliasts were chosen randomly based on two factors. First, that they were on the official list of 6,000 potential Heliasts. Second, that they were present at court on the day of the trial. A stipend of 2 obols was established by Pericles to compensate for the loss of work while on Heliast duty, and also to encourage participation in the judiciary process. In the Agora, an Athenian could buy and sell many different products. The permanent retail market was divided into sections according to the category of merchandise. Merchants and craftsmen who worked in the market could be citizens, foreigners, or even freed slaves. They sold everything from food and clothes to jewelry and slaves. With so much variety, competition was fierce, and that competition helped regulate the market's prices.
Τι το τούτον!
Το έχει πράσινα ποτάμια και εδώ και στον έλεον διέλυση ωραία και ζωηρά. Και εξουσιάσεις που φρυδώνουν.
Πολλό ό,τι δίλανε ονίσει.
Τι τα πολλών, δύναστη ως περιθία ακριβώς αναζητείς. Σύ δώσω δύο, κόφτε θεοπόλα, κόφτε τελάρι της. Ελέας μόνο, είδωρ διαφυλάτεται. Νόμος περί του αντίον υφίσταται, ελέγχρη.
Ότι ούν οράσεστη καλόν όσο ότι ένες της αγοράς και τόσο καλόν όσο πανταχούφιον.
Αύκιστη πρώτη είναι η άυσια σοφία. Δυνατόν ή ο λίγο οξύτερον. Ποιες τα.
Ότι στα λάσεις πόλεμος επαξεί τα εμπορεύματα του ευξημερπών. Είναι καπιστή η κρίση σε ελόφια ή η άρχιση του αντίληψης.
Έχουν ευθύνους ευχόντου. Οι αλιστάς επομενέτου και εκ της αντίλου χαλκιδόνους ερωτής.
Πολλό ότι ζήλανε ονίσει. Έναν οβολόν. Φυσική 24 και.
Σύ δώσω δύο. Άπαντες τους αλιστούς εν σίδωρ διαφυλάται. Νόμος περί του αντίον υφίσταται.
Κάκιον και πολλό κάκιον έτη. Έκαστος κρεοπόλης.
Φεστίν.
Η απίθνουσα αναμένουσα τον νέκτο.
Μόνο τις βλάξε περίδι δούλους έχει ψυχάσει. Ιδού οι νήσεις των δούλων τη πόλη σαν ελεύθερη. Άκουε του εαυτού σου, λυρολογείς φι. Η δούλη συγκητούσι μήνων λούθη είχε. Ισχυρός εστός, πώς δυνατόν η σημεί ώραν ένα κύριο τόσης αποτυχής. Ικανή ανοίξε τα στήρας, ειδικός των αποθηκών.
Κρέας γίγνεται φε. Κάκτιον.
The Heliaio wasn't the only court in Athens. This other court was located next to the South Stoa. Historians believe it to be a court based on the discovery of a nearby box containing 7 bronze ballots. These ballots were used by jurors to give their verdicts. The reason trials were so common in Athens might have been related to their democratic regime, which promoted the individual's right to demand reparations for injustice. However, not all legal matters were settled in this fashion. If a claim was small enough, it was settled individually by a magistrate. Public trials were reserved for more serious offenses, such as murder, theft, and political crimes.
Παρόντε φοβούν δεν μη φέρουσιν τα επόλια σφόνη στα οδούς της πόλης. Η κρεοπόλια θεαυτούς δίοι. γαλαθινούς, αμνούς και πόσους.
The mint was where the city made its coinage. It is believed that Athens' mint was in the city's agora, as modern excavations have turned up small disc-shaped pieces of metal used to make coins. Much of the silver required for minting coinage came from the Lavrion silver mines. Athens was so dependent on the mines that when they lost them during the Peloponnesian War, the city was forced to melt down a gold statue of Athena to mint gold coins and avert a monetary crisis.
Εντάξει, μόνο τι...
You have now experienced the Agora, following in the footsteps of countless Athenians before you. I hope the trip has impressed upon you how important this place was to trade, politics, and law. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. Very well. Let's begin. Which philosopher's school took its name from the painted stoa? Valis had an obsession with water, which he believed made up all matter in the world. He also lived a full lifetime before the Pikili Stoa was constructed. Try again. Socrates was one of the greatest minds in Greece, but there are no records of him teaching at the Painted Stoa. Try a different answer. Yes, Zenon taught at the Stoa, and so he and his followers were dubbed Stoics. Time for another question. What other name has the Iphistion gone by? What other name has the Iphistion gone by? The Temple of Hephaestus depicted scenes from the labors of Heracles, but it was never known as the Heraklion. Try again. That is another building entirely, located on Athens' Acropolis. Try another answer. The Voulefterion was where the council known as the Vouli met to discuss civic matters. Keep trying. Correct! The name was inspired by the scenes showing the hero Theseus, which decorate the temple. Only one question left. When Athens lost the Lavrion silver mines during the Peloponnesian War, which statue did they melt down to mint new coins? Correct. The Athenians melted down a statue of Athena to mint gold coins. It's clear you are very familiar with the Agora of Athens. I'm impressed. As you wish. Let's see what else Greece has in store for you. Greetings, Wanderer. It is my pleasure to introduce you to a unique tour. One that won't take you to impressive landmarks or famous battle sites, but through a typical Athenian home. For an outgoing people like the Greeks, the house was a refuge of privacy. Inside, they could escape from the constant demands of civic life to enjoy the simple pleasures of family life. Look for me when you are done, and we can discuss the things you've seen. Farewell for now.
The house, or oikos, was a residence for Greek families and their slaves. Contrary to modern houses, which look outward, the Greek household was built to look inward on a courtyard. The courtyard was the house's central fixture. It was the building's main source of daylight and also the location of religious altars dedicated to worship. The building itself was made up of familiar accommodations, including bedrooms, storage rooms, a kitchen, and a living room. Women were generally in charge of tending to the home, which in Greece was called oikonomia, a term that inspired the modern word economy. pasta was a corridor that connected a house's courtyard to its residential section. Archaeological evidence from the city of Olynthos reveals that pastas were added to Greek home design in the 5th century BCE. Greeks had no qualms about combining their work and their private lives, and many of them worked from home. Artisans like blacksmiths, sculptors, and potters often had workshops in their houses. Some even operated small stores to sell their work. Similarly, doctors were known to treat patients in special offices located in their homes. Women also worked in the house and were responsible for making textiles, as well as producing clothes and supervising weaving, which was carried out by slaves. If the household was wealthy enough, they could even produce a surplus of textiles to sell in times of financial difficulty. The inner courtyard was the nexus of the house. Functionally, it allowed air to circulate and also provided access to most of the rooms. It also sometimes housed a well or a cistern that collected rainwater. In the center of the courtyard was an altar to Zeus Hercules, who served as the protector of the household. Women would often use the space to sew and cook, while children used it as a play area. Furthermore, if the family had pets or animals, the courtyard was where they were allowed to run free.
Μεγαλώνει και πολιώνει μου, χθονία και πυροκτώνει, φιλαγορότη και λυτηρία, δρυμονίτης και βρωτών ελπίς, ελθέη κατέχεις ωραίων γρήγους, ελθέ Θεά σώθη, άγουσα καλούς καρπούς απογέης, ειρήνη τερατή, καλυπλόκαμον, θυγιείαν και ω, Θεά εύδρομε, πέμπεις της ωραίων και χαλάς, νόσουστε και άλγη. Επικαλούμεση, μάκα, πολιώνυμο, Ηρύπολε και τελετάρχα, Θεόν πάτερ ιδέ και ιέ, σκυπτούχε, κούρε δημάτε, βοτριλόκος με οδηγέ των κομμών, ελθέ μάκα, νήστες υβρίων και χαρημένος ο ήλιος.
The bathroom was located in the back of the house. Much like today, it was used for cleaning and washing, although the Greeks used chamber pots instead of toilets. Most bathrooms had a luterion that could be filled with water for washing. Mirrors, razors, strigils, and sponges could also be found in the bathroom, along with small vases called aryballoi, which were usually filled with perfume or oil. Greek homes had kitchens where the family's meals were prepared. The Greeks did not often eat meat, except during special occasions like banquets or after sacrifices. They had mainly a grain-based diet, eating staples such as bread, porridge, or a barley cake called maza. They also occasionally ate poultry, fish, and other seafood, as well as fruits, vegetables, goat milk and cheese, and olive oil. Food was cooked on a tripod, or sometimes in a klibanos, which was a sort of mobile oven. Other cooking implements included braziers, mortars and pestles, a spit to hold food over a fire, platters, and frying pans. The family also used the kitchen to store food in containers called pithoi. The bathroom was located in the back of the house. Much like today, it was used for cleaning and washing. Most bathroom mirrors, razors. The bathroom was located most mirrors. Symposia were major social institutions in Greece. They were drinking parties held exclusively for men. The party took place in the men's section of the house, the andron, where residents and guests reclined on special couches called klinai. Food was served on low tables set in front of the couches, while wine was placed in a crater in the center of the room. During a symposium, men drank, sang, had philosophical discussions, and played games like kotobos. Musicians, dancers, and even courtesans were often welcomed to attend as well. However, wives and daughters were always excluded.
Αληθώς και χαριτωμένων. Ουκέ στην όστη σου χαιρετίζει ωρά άπαντας και έφυγε το πέρι ωρά του κοινός και συνάπτει σφιχτός τους δακτύλους του επί το κόλλο του κοινός και ο κύον ου φοβείται.
Μη παρέχεις.
Αυτή πως εδέχει τάχια προς χάριν σου και μην τη μητέρα σου.
Και είπες, τι έστειν η φύση, είμαι το σου τόνος δεκτή.
Νίκο εσάν ότι φυγάτε μου, κληρονόμηση νικίαν και δούλους παραδείωτες.
Ως ήθιστε, ότι το έσωτε του ανδρός της.
Ως εταίρο δύο αγαπά τον αλλήλους.
Ο Κούνι Ρίστο μετέβη με ταυτής αγορά.
Διαλέγομαι έναν τούτο άλοθη, μάλλον ιδιωτικός.
The Pyrgos, or upper stories, was the women's quarter of the house, where they could pursue their activities and observe the city without being seen themselves. The rooftops were also used in a special rite called the Adonia, a private celebration held in honor of Adonis, which was reserved for women. At the beginning of spring, women filled terracotta pots with soil and lettuce seeds, then climbed a ladder to place the pots on the rooftop. These pots served as the women's very own Gardens of Adonis.
Επικαλούμεσαι.
hope you now have a better understanding of the routines and home life of the Greek people. What would you like to do next? Then let's start with a simple question. Which group of people celebrated the Adhonia? Which group of people celebrated the Adhonia? Correct. The Adhonia was celebrated by women of all stations. Let's move on to the next question. Which of the following was known as the protector of the household? Yes, Zeus Herkios protected the household, and an altar to the god usually stood in the center of the house's courtyard. On to the final question. Which of the following was not located in the bathroom? Which of the following was not located in the bathroom? I'm afraid mirrors were quite common in bathrooms. Keep trying. Strigils were often found in Greek bathrooms, where they were most likely used to remove sweat before bathing. Try again. Correct. The Klivanos was a mobile oven usually found in the kitchen. It seems you really know your way around Greek homes. Well done, Wanderer. As you wish. Come with me.
My friend! How fortuitous to run into you in this most intoxicating place! I'd offer you a drink, but for some reason the workers won't let me borrow any of their wine. Cheapskates. As you can probably tell by all the grapes, this is one of Greece's many vineyards. Wine was an essential part of Greek culture, and this tour will take you through how it was made. In addition to being delicious, not to mention lucrative, wine was an important part of Greek economy. I promise I'll meet you at the end of your visit, my friend. See you soon!
Winemaking dates back to the 4th or 3rd millennium BCE. It became widespread in Greece during the Bronze Age, and within centuries the Greeks had refined it further. The first step in the process was always harvesting, where grapes grown on rows of vines were collected by vineyard workers. According to Homer, harvesting was often accompanied by music to give it a more festive atmosphere. Ancient Greek wine mainly came in 3 different varieties: Osteros, Glucation, and Autokratos. It could be flavored with spices, herbs, resin, and even perfume. It was also much stronger than modern wine, with an alcohol percentage of approximately 16%. Because of this, the drink was mixed with water to make it more palatable. Grapes were dried to maximize the wine's sweetness and prevent it from turning into vinegar. In most vineyards, the drying process involved laying the grapes out on the ground under the heat of the sun, then covering them at night to protect them from accumulating dew. According to Hesiod's poem, Works and Days, the ideal time to dry grapes was 10 days and 10 nights. When they were finally completely dried, the grapes were collected in jars, just as they are today. The Greeks had many methods for crushing the harvested grapes. The most common technique was to use a lenos, a large treading vat where workers stomped on grapes with their feet. Alternatively, the Greeks sometimes crushed the grapes by hand using a strainer, mashed them with a mortar and pestle, or squeezed them using a tool called a sack press.
Ίσως ο χείρος... Άκουε το εαυτού σου, λυρολογίσθη, η δούληση κυκλούσι ημίν ολούθε ηλίθιε.
After the grapes were pressed, the resulting juice was poured into large containers called pithoi, where it fermented. Once fully fermented, The wine was filtered through an ethmos, or sack, which separated it from the residual yeast called lees. The wine was then placed in a special storage room. The room was half buried to keep it dry and maintain a consistent temperature of 15 degrees Celsius. These measures ensured the wine wouldn't lose any of its quality before being shipped to market. When the wine was ready to ship, it was poured into storage containers called amphoras. These were smaller than pithoi, which made them easier to ship and display in crowded marketplaces. However, that doesn't mean transporting wine was always a safe endeavor. Sometimes ships carrying amphoras as cargo would be wrecked before making it to their destination, losing hundreds of bottles of wine to the sea.
My friend, are you drunk with knowledge? I hope you enjoyed yourself learning about all the picking, stumping, and bottling that goes into making Greece's favorite beverage. Maybe if my customers understood how hard winemaking was, they'd agree more with my perfectly reasonable prices. But let's talk about something else, yes? What else can I do for you? You want your intelligence tested? Well, let me tell you, my friend, no one is more qualified for that task than me. Let's get started. What container was used to ship wine to the market? Yes, wine was stored in amphoras during its long journey to market. Here's another question. Which of the following wasn't a type of wine variety?
Φύγε, Πόρο. Προείδηκα το πατρί σου ότι έτη πάμε να αποστείλω τη σύγκρο.
Τώρα πλήσμονες κλεπτεδίονες με. Είναι διαθέτονται επί το λιμένα ότι λείψονται αντί της θείου παιδεία και γυναίκες συντόμους.
Glycazon was the sweetest type of wine and my personal favorite, but it is not the correct answer. Try another one. Correct. Thasos was an island famous for its vineyards, not a specific type of wine. Just one more question to go, my friend. Which part of the winemaking process created the grape juice necessary for wine? Which part of the winemaking process created the grape juice necessary for wine? That's the one! The harvested grapes were pressed in a linos, often by the feet of vineyard workers. Just try not to think about that last part whenever you have a cup of wine. You know your wine. You're as good with facts as I am with money, and that's really saying something. Such an enterprising spirit! I like that. Follow me, my friend.
Της θεής προελέλητο με γεγονένε πτωχών παραδειγματισμού ένεγε. Έτσι δέη ετοιμότατη των πολιτών πίσονται. Εώρα καλυμών αποστασίας, αυτά τα τέκνα μου εκπίπτονται εις το πύλη.
Welcome to Corinth, Wanderer. I have a special visit planned for you today. It's an intimate, informative look into the daily lives of Greek women. Corinth was one of the largest cities in ancient Greece. It had an estimated population of 90,000 in my times, and much of that population was made up of women. This tour will shine a light on those women and look at how they lived on a day-to-day basis. Look for me when you're done with your visit, and we can discuss things further.
Young girls growing up in ancient Greek cities were usually raised by a nurse. They mostly stayed in the women's quarters of the house, the gunaikon, where they spent their time spinning threads and weaving. While there is not much historical evidence of young girls at play, especially compared to boys, it was still known to happen. For example, an ancient terracotta group depicts two girls playing ephedrismos. This was a competition to see who could strike an upright rock from afar using a pebble or ball. The game's loser had to close their eyes and carry the victor until they managed to touch the same rock with their hands.
Τραπεζίτης και τον θυσιατέλη ήταν
For a young Greek woman, marriage was the culmination of their induction into society. The average life expectancy for women was about 40 years, so most marriages took place when the bride was 14 or 15 years old. The marriage did not require her consent either. Instead, she was passed on from the protection of her father to that of her husband. Married women were not technically citizens at the time and lacked the rights that came with official citizenship. However, they did receive a dowry that only they were allowed to spend. But in the event of a failed marriage, the dowry was returned to the bride's father. After the marriage was consummated, the woman's status changed from being a maiden to a bride. She remained a bride until the birth of her first child, wherein she officially became a woman.
Εν μη σφαιρίσκιον κενών, εκ χορδών χειριδίου τούτο εστί. Ακρότερον, των σφαιριδίων απάνω. Διάτι λοιπόν αυτό το
Ήδη κάτι έστεινόταν η συνεχλά. Ούτε το τέκνον μου παραλατομείο να πήγαγαν κι αν οι λεός ελιθοβόλησαν. Λιθοκόπο ύβρον το πεδίο. Τα ημάτια. Κατανοήσω τι λόγον υπέχεις των πράξεών σου. Τι έχεις ανηδίν περί ευθύνης.
Women living in ancient Greek cities were essentially forbidden from participating in political life, and most aspects of their lives were controlled by men. Their most important responsibilities were running the household and giving birth to children, preferably boys. Most of the time, women's excursions outside of the house were limited to visiting other female neighbors, as per custom. The few exceptions to this strict rule were weddings, funerals, and religious festivals involving women in prominent public roles.
τεινά δυνάμενων αν παρέχει η προμήθεια ενάλατος και τεινά άλλων φέρει ναρκήματα.
Making textiles was the main occupation of most Greek women. It was a woman's responsibility to manufacture clothing for each of her family members, as well as to weave other household textiles. Women with exceptional weaving skills were believed to make excellent wives, and weaving in general was seen as a very attractive quality. For example, Homer describes Odysseus's devoted wife Penelope as spending most of her days weaving at the loom. Similarly, many Greek vases depicting women weaving were combined with images of a woman holding a veil, which was seen as the symbol of a bride. Ancient Greek women cooked in their house's kitchen area. However, since their cooking equipment was small and portable, they also sometimes prepared meals in the central courtyard. This was also where women performed other domestic activities. These activities were rarely seen by visiting men or passers-by, because the architecture of classical Greek houses facilitated the social norm that women should never be seen at work. The historian Strabo relays that the Temple of Aphrodite was one of Corinth's most famous landmarks. This was largely due to the temple's female patrons. These hetairai, as they were called, were donated to the goddess by both men and women. According to Strabo, the Temple of Aphrodite contributed greatly to Corinth's wealth. The hetairai were the temple's main attraction, and many visitors came to Corinth in search of their company, for which they spent frequently and frivolously.
Hello again, Wanderer. I hope your visit was an interesting one. Greek women lived very restricted lives compared to men, but throughout it all, they held on to their strength and dignity. Is there anything else you'd like to do? Feeling up for a test? Excellent! Let's begin with an easier question. What was the name of the women's quarters in a Greek home? Correct. The Ginekon was where young girls spent their days weaving and spinning threads. On to the next question. The Corinthian temple said to employ the Hetera was dedicated to which god? The Corinthian temple said to employ the Hetera was dedicated to which god? No, the temple was not dedicated to Athena. Try a different answer. Correct. Aphrodite was the goddess of love and passion, so it's only fitting her temple served such an amorous purpose. We're almost done. Just one more question. What was the name of Odysseus' wife? Yes, Penelope was Odysseus' loyal wife, who kept at her weaving while waiting for her husband to return from war. You passed the test, Wanderer. Congratulations. Of course. Let's see what Greece has in store for you.
Ανυπόφορον εστίν οράν.
Welcome to Argos, traveler. This is Argos, one of the oldest cities in Greece. The Argives were an ingenious people famous for innovations in areas like military tactics. However, what they were most renowned for was their metallurgic artistry, especially with bronze. I hope you enjoy yourself. Look for me at the end of your visit.
The area that would become Argos was inhabited as early as the 3rd millennium BCE, but it was in the 7th century BCE that it officially became a city-state. One of Argos's major pillars was its metallurgical industry. As far back as the 8th century BCE, the city was famed for making products like long dress pins and tripod cauldrons, as well as impeccable body armor. In addition to their technical excellence, the Argives were also creative. as seen in their masterful bronze sculpting, which became prominent in the city during the 6th and 5th century BCE.
Τέσσερα, 6, 8, 10, 2, 10, 4 και 10, 6 και 10, 8 και 10, 20, 2 και 20, 4 και 20, 6 και 20, 2 ιδέοντα, τριάκοντα, τριακόντα, 2, 4, 6.
Bronze is an alloy composed of 90% copper and 10% tin. Because of this, copper and tin needed to be smelted and combined to create the material needed for sculpting. After the bronze alloy was formed, it was melted in special furnaces. They required a tremendous amount of fuel and were usually supplied with charcoal made from specific types of wood. It's possible they were also coated with a protective lining of clay, which would have been sensible given the melting point of bronze is approximately 950 degrees Celsius. Once the bronze was melted and collected, the furnaces were dismantled and dumped. In the 8th century BCE, most small-scale statues were molded using a complicated and lengthy method called solid lost wax casting. From the 7th century BCE onwards, metalworkers adopted the more efficient hollow lost wax casting. At its core, this process involved using sculpting models from wax, making molds over these models, then filling the molds with bronze to produce the desired shapes. The process was advantageous because it saved on materials, produced lighter statues, and reduced the chance of possible defects.
ανέρεση εστιμιασμός μυτιόμενος συναδελφής.
Μυθώδες εκεί, αλλά ανήσυχος είμαι. Τι αστείο φέρουν τα αυτά.
Τις εκ των στρατιωτών. Η φαρπαγέντα άπατα. Φανόντες.
Χρήστο εν παρόδο που κλειδάνιος υπάρχει, οπότε εις αυτήν δώσουμε το χρέος. Οι χαρακτήρες εν τες τραγωδίες προαιρούν.
Once all the pieces of the sculpture were molded, they were welded together and subjected to the cold working process. This process involved repairing the sculpture's flaws by filling any holes and cracks with specifically measured bronze patches. Afterwards, the sculpture was scraped, chiseled, and polished until it was deemed satisfactory. Decorative details like hair, eyebrows, and moustaches were added with the use of a sharp tool. Eyes, which could be inset with ivory, glass, or silver, were attached to their sockets using a resinous kind of glue. Teeth and fingernails were inlaid with silver, and lips and nipples with copper. These small touches added color and contributed to the sculpture's lifelike appearance.
Δώσουμε το χρέος μου.
Bronze sculptures have a long and varied history in Greece. During the geometric period of 900 to 700 BCE, the sculptures mainly depicted idealized heroes, charioteers, and horses, and most of them were dedicated to sanctuaries. The Orientalizing period followed in the 7th century BCE. During this time, Greeks began adopting sculpting techniques from the East, and the depicted statues expanded to include mythological creatures like griffins and sphinxes. The Archaic period saw statues that reflected a better understanding of human anatomy, which eventually culminated in the realistic and powerful human sculptures of the Hellenistic period.
Η ακριβής τελείωση, ούτε αισθημή σπουδαίων, ο εμός πατήρ ούτε μία συναλλαγή είχε με τα θεάτρου. Οσός πατήρης θα
Argos was the home of Polykleitos, one of the most famous sculptors in ancient Greece. His works, like the Doryphorus and Diadomenos, as well as his treatise on sculpting called the Canon, had a massive impact on the art as a whole, particularly in regards to ideal body proportions. Sadly, the original versions of Polykleitos' sculptures have been lost, along with most bronze statues from antiquity. As time went on, many bronze statues were melted down to be recycled in things like weapons, ammunition, and even church bells. Because of this, marble copies from the Roman period are our best evidence of the masterpieces of Greek sculpture.
I see you have completed your tour. I trust you have a new appreciation for Greek sculptures after learning of the heart and soul that was poured into each step of their creation. Now, what else would you like to do? Then let us dive right in. Here is your first question. Which era of sculpting came first? The Hellenistic period began in 323 BCE, following several other eras. Try again. The Classical period lasted from 480 to 323 BCE, making it relatively new in the grand scheme of things. But please, try another answer. The Orientalizing period lasted for most of the 7th century BCE. It introduced Eastern sculpting techniques to the Greek world. But it was not the earliest era. Try a different answer. Correct. The Geometric period lasted from 900 to 700 BCE, and mostly featured small-scale statues and statuettes of heroes and horses. On to the second question. Bronze was an alloy composed of which two metals? Yes. To get the bronze required for sculpting, metal workers first needed to smelt copper and tin. One last question for you. Which renowned sculptor was a native of Argos? Yes. Polykleitos was based in Argos and had an enormous impact on the art of sculpting. You've done well, traveler. Your knowledge of metalwork is astounding. And so, your quest for knowledge continues. Follow me.
καθοδόν Ιωνικού. Ο αιμός πεθερός εκεί πλέον διαμένει και εμένα
my friend. I see you followed your nose to this lovely perfumery, perfume yard, perfactory? Yes, let's go with perfactory. This sensuous little island is where perfume was produced. Your nostrils are in for a treat, unless you're allergic, in which case I could sell you a wonderful remedy for a very reasonable price. No? Okay then. I'll check in on you at the end of your visit. See you soon, my friend.
Perfume-making techniques were invented and perfected in Mesopotamia and Egypt, beginning in the 4th millennium BCE. By the time of the Mycenaean era, perfume played an important role in the Greek economy. Mostly reserved for kings, priests, and aristocrats in the beginning, it later became more widely available during the classical and Hellenistic periods. Greeks used perfume for more than just personal cosmetics. It also had sacred uses. For example, cults would sometimes anoint their god's statue with perfume, and it was also used during rituals like weddings and funerals. Food and wine could also be scented with perfume to add to a meal's presentation. The art of making perfume was part of medicine and pharmacology, and physicians devoted entire books listing the best perfume recipes. Perfume is made up of two main components: a greasy substance, called an excipient, like vegetable oil or animal fat, and an odorous substance, such as flowers and plants. For ancient Greeks, the most common excipient was olive oil. According to Theophrastus, however, the most valuable oils were those extracted from nuts in the Syrian and Egyptian deserts. The odorous ingredient could be taken from a variety of sources. These include flowers like roses or lilies, herbs like oregano, spices like saffron, resins like amber, and leaves from plants. Some fragrances were also imported from outside of Greece, like Indian cinnamon and Syrian frankincense. These exotic scents were considered exceptionally precious. Mixing scent into the fatty excipient was called enfleurage, of which there were two methods. If the flower being used for the scent was fragile, the preferred method of extraction was cold enfleurage, which required an oil-soaked cloth. First, the cloth was rubbed against the flower's petals. saturating the oil with the scent. Then, the cloth was pressed to wring out the scented oil. Hot enfleurage involved heating the excipient before mixing in the scented substance. The hot enfleurage process consisted of heating and distillation. After the scented ingredients were dipped into heated oil, the mixture was then filtered before being pressed and decanted. Once the mixture was complete, spices, coloring agents and fixatives were added, along with preservatives to prevent the perfume from spoiling. Finally, the liquid was hermetically sealed in bottles, ready to be shipped to market.
Ανυπόφορον εστίν οράν. Ίσον αρκαθεύω.
Perfume was usually bottled in ceramic or glass flasks, but more luxurious fragrances were contained in ornamented and painted flasks. Lekythoi and alabastra were elegant bottles designed for women, while arabaloi were used by athletes. It was common for the bottle's craftsmen to brand them to prevent frauds and knockoffs. Perfume shops were usually located in city centers, befitting of their importance. In addition to selling perfume, they were also sometimes used as meeting places. For example, the perfume shops near Athens's Agora were frequented every morning by the city's youth.
Ευράξ πατάς. αυτή όχλησης. Οχλής.
The main purpose of perfume was to attract members of both the opposite and the same sex. We can trace this practice back to a scene in the Iliad, where Hera used perfume to seduce Zeus. Similarly, hymns about goddesses like Demeter and Aphrodite always mention their pleasant smell, further solidifying the belief that scent and seduction went hand in hand. However, perfume was also a mark of social status. Athletes covered themselves in perfumed oils during their training and at symposia, and citizens were judged based on how anointed, shiny, and perfumed their bodies were. The main purpose of perfume was to attract members of both the opposite. We can trace similar further, however, athlete and citizen.
Hello again, my friend. I hope you see now how important perfume was, not only for aesthetic purposes, but for Greek social hierarchy. I wouldn't charge so much for my own bottles if I didn't know the value of what I was selling. What else can Marcos do for you? Good idea. Let's start with an easy question. Which of the following is an example of an excipient? Flower petals can add a lovely smell to the perfume, but they aren't excipients. Try again. Plant leaves make great perfume ingredients, but they aren't excipients. Try a different answer. Yes, olive oil makes a great excipient, and dressing, and medicine. Honestly, we pour that stuff on everything, including ourselves. And question 2. What is enfleurage? Correct. Enfleurage involved mixing the perfume scent into an excipient. We're almost done. Just one more question. In the Iliad, which goddess used perfume to seduce Zeus? A fair guess, but in this case, an incorrect one. Try another answer. Yes, Hera poured a saucy scent on herself to get her husband's attention. You did it! You've completed the test. Your wish is my command. Follow me.
Ως γέγηθα ατεωρώνσε.
Αληθές εστί.
Κατανοώ ότι θέλεις να συναντήσεις.
Ναι, όμως γάμος εστί επιχείρησης.
Welcome, visitor, to where Spartan boys become Spartan men. The Agogi was Sparta's strict education system. The strenuous regimen took in the young boys and then reshaped them until nothing was left but the strength, intelligence, and resolve of a perfect Spartan citizen. I will find you once your visit has ended, and we will talk further. Until then, visitor.
Ως γέγηθα ατεωρώνσε.
Μόνο όταν το επιχείρημα δομή και πιστικών, τότε δεν θα κερδάνε ζήτημα. Πίστα τα νημίτηρη κλινήρης.
Ποιος περσέ, μία μία πίτουσα αναμένουσα.
Sparta was a Greek city located in the Peloponnese. It differed from other cities of the time in that it had no walls. Sparta originated as 4 neighboring villages: Patane, Limnes, Mizoa, and Cynosura, all of which shared the same political, military, and religious life. After 2 wars with the Messenians, the city's territory expanded even further. By the 5th century BCE, they allegedly controlled almost half of the Peloponnese.
Ανατρέχομενοι στους τραγικούς της δομής ταύτισε, μάλλον η Σοφοκλέα.
Χρώμεθα το παραδείγματι των έργων.
σταθεί εν επιχείρημα 2 οι όροι «Συ», το γίγνος κιν και το επίσταστε. Σύμφωνοι. Πού καλυθές τούτο
The Agoge was the military training and education program undergone by Sparta's male youth. Grooming men for war was one of the city's main priorities. Boys began their training at the young age of 7 and completed it when they were 30. It has been said that Spartan infants were inspected for weakness shortly after birth. If they were deemed too sickly, they were thrown into chasms. However, this information remains unproven. The healthy boys were considered suitable for training. When they came of age, they were removed from their families and were placed into service of the state. Their education included subjects like reading, writing, and even music, but was mostly focused on tough military exercises meant to turn the boys into efficient soldiers. The Agoge was divided into 3 cycles. One for boys aged 7 to 12, one for adolescents aged 12 to 20, and one for men aged 20 to 30. Each cycle included different exercises for refining the body and mind.
Αδυνάμενο να είναι πριν συμπλαστεία είναι ωραία, μηδενός αντιτίμου σχεδόν.
Βεβαίως απαντήρια του κρεοπόληση. Έμαθα λοιπόν το σκύλο του ατέρματα.
Όσοι έγινα θεωρώς.
Sparta played a large role in defeating the Persians during the Greco-Persian Wars in the 5th century BCE. They held their king Leonidas' glorious death at the Battle of Thermopylae in particularly high esteem. Because Leonidas was killed in battle, Sparta believed he died a good death and showed incredible bravery, qualities to be held as a model for all Spartans. This idealized bravery was embedded in the city's collective memory and was the main quality people strove for in the Agoge.
Μεγαλώνει με θεά, αγλαώκη με, τεχνών μήτρ πολύολβε, πολυλίστη λυτήρα κακών, της τρούσα βρωτών ψυχάς, ψύχα,
Γενής στρατιώπου ο θύρ μου είναι ήρος, δεν είναι πολέμου, λέγει, ημίτους μυντούν.
The first cycle of the Agoge focused on boys aged 7 to 12. Each of the boys had shaved heads and wore light clothing. They walked everywhere barefoot, swam the Eurotas River all year long, slept on reeds, and participated in cult rituals for Artemis or Thea. The boys were grouped into herds, or agoli, and were supervised by older adolescents. Once they reached the age of 12, they entered the second cycle of the Agoge, which aimed to integrate them into the society of citizen soldiers.
Γενής στρατιώτου-τινός. Ο πατήρ μου είναι Ήρος.
Παπέ, το αιμοχυρίδιον εξέπνευσε. Τεθλιμμένος στα μάλα είναι. Ακαταπαύστος έστι ανίκανο η διαπογύμναση.
The Agogé's second cycle included boys aged 12 to 20. When they reached the age of 20, the young men were dubbed Erinyes and could officially serve as hoplites in the Spartan army. Until the age of 30, Spartan men lived in communal mess halls called Siskenia. From the age of 22 onward, they were permitted to start a family, but 30 was viewed as a more appropriate age to get married. Spartan men served in the military until they turned 60, when they were designated as elders, or gerontes. However, many were known to continue serving anyway, such as King Archimedes III, who fought in the army until he was killed in battle at the age of 62. All adult male Spartans participated in communal meals called syssitia. The attending Spartans contributed different kinds of food on a monthly basis, in addition to a small sum of money to pay for meat. Each man was entitled to one portion of a meal, with the exception of the kings, who received 2 portions. Syssitia attendance was mandatory for every Spartan fortunate enough to be part of the group. The meals had great political significance. According to Xenophon and Plutarch, the Syssitia was designed to foster a sense of equality between citizens. It also demonstrated the self-restraint and moderation of Spartan society. But in reality, the Syssitia only increased the differentiation between the rich and the poor. Those who could not afford to contribute to the communal food not only missed their meals, but also lost their right of citizenship.
Your tour has ended. As you have seen, the Agoge was not for the weak or faint of heart, but it did its job. in producing skilled warriors and shrewd citizens. What else would you like to do? So you think you are ready for a test? Very well. Let us see how you fare. First, a simple question. The Agogi was made up of how many cycles? Correct. The Agogi was divided into 3 cycles. One for boys aged 7 to 12, one for adolescents aged 12 to 20, and one for men aged 20 to 30. Next question. How many meal portions were kings entitled to at Syssitia? Yes, Spartan kings had the right to double portions. One final question. When were Spartans allowed to grow mustaches? Yes. Once a Spartan man was over 30, he was allowed to adorn his face with a glorious display of manhood. Impressive, visitor. You should be proud. As you wish. Come this way.
Welcome, traveler, to the site of the legendary Battle of Marathon. Marathon was the location of one of the greatest battles in Greek history. It was here where Athenians made a stand against the might of an imposing Persian fleet. Your visit will take you through the causes of the conflict, the battle itself, and its far-reaching consequences. I will see you again once you're through. Farewell for now.
In 490 BCE, 600 Persian triremes landed on a beach 35 kilometers north of Athens. Standing in their way were 11,000 hoplites, led by the prestigious Athenian general Miltiades. The Persian forces outnumbered the Greeks approximately 5 to 1, and yet, the smaller force managed to push back their would-be conquerors. The Battle of Marathon was a major turning point in the Greco-Persian Wars, and the Athenians' victory would be celebrated for many years. The modern-day distance-running event is named a marathon in memory of a soldier from the battle who ran back to Athens to announce their victory, though whether this is real or legend is uncertain. The Persians wanted to invade Greece in part due to its rich silver mines. In 545 BCE, they came closer to this goal after their victory over Croesus, the king of Lydia. The victory forced some Greek populations in Asia Minor to surrender and gave the Persians a solid foothold to carry out a large-scale invasion. In 494 BCE, the city of Miletus revolted against its Persian rulers. They were aided by Athens and the nearby city of Eretria, and even burned down an important Persian temple. The Persian king Darius was enraged by their sacrilege, and in 491 BCE, sent messengers to the Greek cities demanding their submission. Athens and Sparta killed the Persian messengers, goading Darius to invade. The Persians began their attacks, first capturing the city of Naxos and enslaving its inhabitants, then taking the city of Eretria. Filled with confidence from their string of victories, the Persians set their sights on Athens. The Greeks were surprised by the ferocity of the Persian attacks. Seeking aid against the upcoming invasion, Athens was forced to appeal to other cities for help. In a surprising move, they asked for aid from Sparta, known for having the strongest army in Greece. The Spartans agreed to the request, but they were unable to send reinforcements in time due to the religious feast of Apollo Carneos, which forbade them from leaving their city until the next full moon. The only extra help Athens managed to acquire was from the small Boeotian city of Plataea, which sent an additional 1,000 hoplites. This was the first time in Greek history that their entire civilization was under attack from an external invader. Despite sharing the same language and same religion, Greek city-states had often warred amongst themselves. The Persian invasion was the first time they realized the necessity of collective action to ensure their survival. The Persian fleet originally planned to land at the port of Phaleron. However, the exiled Athenian tyrant Hippias, who sided with the Persians, advised them to land at Marathon instead, where it would be easier to deploy cavalry. The Athenians were unaware of the Persian battle plans and left Marathon undefended. This allowed the Persians to quietly set up camp on the beach, while Athens scrambled to mount a defense. The Persians' overwhelming numerical superiority forced the Athenians to get creative with their defensive strategy. The city sent 10,000 hoplites, along with the extra 1,000 Plataean reinforcements, to a hill located above the Persian encampment. Once in position, Athenians had to decide whether to wait for the Persians to attack or to strike them first. Athens' strategists believed the former option was better, but the general Miltiades believed a first strike was more advantageous, as the Persians had their backs to the sea. In the end, Miltiades' opinion prevailed, and the Greeks made their move. The Persians' overwhelming numerical superiority forced the Athenians to get creative. The city sent 10,000. Once in position, Athens as the Persians. In the end, according to Herodotus, the Greek forces charged at the Persians without archers or cavalry. The Persians were unprepared for what they saw as an act of madness. While they were able to hold the Greeks back at first, they were eventually pushed back to their ships and forced to retreat. The Persians suffered heavy losses during the battle, with approximately 6,400 casualties. The Athenians, on the other hand, only lost 192 soldiers. The victory at Marathon was considered miraculous. The Greeks attributed this miracle to the appearance of legendary heroes who they allegedly saw return from the dead to fight at their side in defense of the city. For example, several Athenians swore they saw the mythical King Theseus take up arms at Marathon, a scene which would later be depicted in Athens' Agora. Similarly, some hoplites attested that Heracles appeared at Marathon, clad in his lion's skin and wielding a club. The supposed appearance of these heroes helped elevate the Battle of Marathon to a legendary status among the Greek people. After the Persians fled Marathon, they tried to invade Athens by way of the Bay of Phaleron. However, this gave the Athenians time to return to their city and mount a proper defense. Fearing further losses, the admiral of the Persian fleet called off their attack, and the Persians returned to their empire. Darius was furious at the campaign's failure and decided to seek vengeance in a retaliatory expedition from both land and sea. Meanwhile, Sparta begrudgingly congratulated Athens on their victory. The victory at Marathon marked the beginning of a new era for Athens. According to Herodotus, Athens' success at pushing back the Persians ranked them first in the ongoing competition between the Greek city-states. The Athenians immortalized their prestige by erecting monuments in both their own city and in Delphi. The Battle of Marathon was also perceived as a blow against tyranny. Tyranny went from being perceived as a simple flaw in authoritarian excess to major treason against the homeland, a sin that rulers would take great pains to avoid being accused of. This helped consolidate the institution of democracy for the next 2 centuries.
I hope you enjoyed this look into the famous Battle of Marathon. It was not only a major turning point in the history of Athens, but also for all of Greece. Its repercussions would be felt for many years to come. Is there anything else you'd like to do? Of course. Let's start with a simple question. Which Athenian general led the Greek forces at Marathon? Leonidas was a Spartan warrior king and would not have led an army of Athenian soldiers. Try again. Alcibiades was Athenian, yes, but he was born a few decades too late to fight in the battle. Keep trying. Brasidas was a Spartan general, and while Athens asked Sparta for aid, they were unable to send reinforcements in time for the battle. But please, try another answer. Correct. Miltiades led the forces at Marathon, and it was his strategy that helped the Greeks push the Persians back. Time for another question. Which Greek city revolted against the Persians in 494 BCE? Persepolis was actually the ceremonial capital of the Persian Empire, so I doubt it had much reason to revolt. Keep trying, though. No, I'm afraid Naxos was taken by the Persian fleet on their way to Athens. Try another answer. Correct. Miletus revolted against Persian rule, with support from both Athens and Eretria. One more question. Which other Greek city aided Athens at Marathon? I'm afraid Naxos was pillaged by the Persians on their way to attack Athens. Try again. Unfortunately, Eretria was taken by the Persians, and thus unable to help. Keep trying. Yes, Plataea sent 1,000 Obides to aid the Athenian forces. Well done, traveler. You have learned much. Very well. Follow me closely, traveler.